their students to participate in this virtual academic platform to learn philosophy and to live with philosophy. I welcome to the students, scholars, and teachers of philosophy, those have engaged themselves in our webinar series since its inception for the last 2 months. Friends, our organizers, particularly the Armeni and the convener Sri Pramod Kumar Das, has taken a lot of strain to execute all the webinars for the last 2 months, in spite of his personal and family problems. It's my honor to decide the name of our coordinators, Patita Panu sir, Raul sir, Devashish sir, Dr. Pragya, Dr. Kalyani, and Nivedita, and Maheshwata, and all others who have been a part of philosophy family for taking different assignments to make the webinars successful. Today is our 11th day. Today we have invited Professor Dr. Sacchindra Raul, one of the senior most teacher in philosophy. Uh, Today he will speak on the philosophy of Kant. So before the presentation of his lecture, it's my honor and privilege to speak a few words regarding his academic pursuits. Friends, Professor Raul did his MA from Utkal University and did his MPhil from Pune University in 1992. He has a very brilliant academic career. I don't want to reflect all this in this introduction program. As an MPhil scholar, he wrote his dissertation on the theme Some Reflections on Kant's Philosophy of Mathematics under the supervision of Professor R. Sundarajan. It is a published book which is published by ONU Books, Mirror, which has gained popularity among the scholars who work on the philosophy of Kant. Professor Raul did his PhD from Jadavpur University in the year 2004 under the supervision of Professor Hiranmay Banerjee. His thesis entitled uh, The Structure of Scientific Knowledge, Theories of Kant and Neo-Kantians. Uh, and Dr. Sachin Raul has written many philosophical articles which have been published in different national level and international level journals. And he has attended many national and international seminars as a symposiast and sectional presidents. And he had also owned some administrative posts. He was the Dean of Students Welfare, Ravenshaw University. He was the Registrar at Utkal University of Culture, Bhubaneswar. And a major part of his service career spent in Ravenshaw University, Ravenshaw College, which is now Ravenshaw University. And he has retired from RD Women's College now, which is RD Women's University, Bhubaneswar. After retirement, he has served as a guest faculty in Vani Vihar, Ravenshaw University, UN Autonomous College, Oraspur. So today he is with us, and uh, we have with also Sri Debasi Sarangi. Today he will act as the moderator of this session. Now, may I request Professor Sachin Raul to speak on the scheduled topic, the philosophy of Kant. Welcome to Professor Sachin Raul. Sir, namaskar.
Hello.
Sir, audible.
Hello.
Sir, audible, sir.
Yes. Yes.
Audible,
Yes.
audible, sir.
So, thank you, Kailas, uh, for giving me this opportunity to speak on Kant, so to say, which is the festive of my academic career. I am thankful to all the organizers. I am thankful to those who are listening to me and attending this webinar, all my juniors and all my seniors. With my due respect to all of you, I am going to start my deliberation. As we know, Kant is the culmination of a philosophical tradition. We begin modern philosophy, modern European philosophy, with Descartes and Bacon. We come across two traditions, empiricism and rationalism, and Kant is the last philosopher. Say after Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz in the group of rationalists, Bacon, Locke, Berkeley, Hume in the group of empiricists. So Kant comes at the end, and he is known as a reconciliationist. He reconciled both the traditions. And as you know, Kant was born in 1724 and he died in 1804. So he lived for 80 years. So it will be injustice if I do not speak a few words on his life. As a moralist, he is unparalleled. As a sincere scholar, it is rare in the world. And because of many problems, he became a professor at the age of 44 or 45. Before that, he was a home tutor. So whatever he has written in very late age. And basically, he was a man of science, geometry, arithmetic, and at the same time, an idealist. He was student of Baumgarten. Baumgarten was the student of Hegel. So, from philosophical point of view, he belongs to the tradition of rationalists. But as we know, after coming across Hume, when he studied Hume, and he could know to what extent we can go by analysis of sense experience. So limits of sense experience. So Hume's deliberation made him aware of his limitations with regard to the rationalistic position. He has said, I got up from my dogmatic slumber. I was in a dogmatic slumber, and he got up from that dogmatic slumber. It is because of Hume. So we will see in course of time what revolutionized Kant's ideas and thoughts, and how he could become the greatest critic in the world of philosophy. So I have already told you, he made reconciliation between two traditions, empiricism and rationalism. So we know rationalism gives priority to the reason, rationality. So they consider, they give much adherence to reason or rationality instead of giving sense experience. And on the other hand, the empiricists, they give much importance to sense perception, and say without sense perception, knowledge will be impossible. And the great tradition of empiricists is there, and we have the analytic tradition, we have the tradition of Frege, Russell, Ayer. So that continues. Anyway, Kant, at the beginning of his book, Kritik der reinen Vernunft in German, because Kant has not written a single line in English. What he wrote in German language, and all his writings have been translated by different scholars all over the world by from German to English. And Kritik der reinen Vernunft, its English translation is Critic of Pure Reason. Those who have studied Kant, they must have known the meaning of the title. The meaning of the title is, it is a critique, which means a critical essay of pure reason. So to say, it is a critical essay of pure reason by pure reason. So who is writing a critical essay? He is writing it out of his pure reason. So we can say it is an essay, it is a critical essay of pure reason by pure reason. At the outset, in his introduction, like this, he has reconciled all our knowledge begins with experience. There is no knowledge prior to experience. Remembering Locke, we can say, mind is a clean slate. Nothing is there before experience. But Kant says, even if all our knowledge begins with experience, there is nothing prior to experience, but all our knowledge does not come from experience. It means knowledge begins with experience. So once it is started, then the mind is ignited and mind contributes out of its own different thoughts, ideas, inferences, and it goes on. So this shows the very root of reconciliation between empiricism and rationalism. Knowledge begins with experience. We get so many things out of experience. Without experience, we cannot have any knowledge, but we should not think that it is the most important source of knowledge and experience is superior to reason. It's not like that. So there are knowledge contributed by our mind, our understanding, our faculty of pure reason. So it goes on. So Kant has divided critique of pure reason into three faculties. So number one, the faculty of sensibility. Number two, the faculty of understanding. Number three, the faculty of pure reason. Even if the title is critique of pure reason, but pure reason is a faculty of pure reason. So the other two faculties are sensibility and understanding. So as we know, sensibility is the capacity to sense. We have the capacity to sense. And sensibility constitutes the first part of his book, that is transcendental aesthetic. And here, before I say something about transcendental aesthetic, where he discusses about space and time as two forms of sensibility, let me tell you that in the introduction, he asks four questions and he raises the problem of the critic, what he wants to do. He asks four questions. The first question is, how is pure mathematics possible? The second question is, how is science of nature possible? The third question is, how is metaphysics? How is metaphysics as a natural disposition possible? The fourth question is, can metaphysics be possible as a science? So this is his agenda, to solve these four questions. And the root of these four questions lies the synthetic a priori judgment. He says synthetic a priori judgments are there in mathematics. Synthetic a priori judgments are basis of natural science, even if metaphysical sentences are in intention synthetic a priori. And can metaphysics be possible as a science? I should say yes, because the kind of metaphysics Kant is rendering, that is a scientific metaphysics, I should say. And his metaphysics is known as transcendental metaphysics, or we can call it transcendental idealism. And the very word transcendental is very crucial. Every time, in every title, he uses the word transcendental. And we should all know, if any of you do not know, any of you doesn't know the meaning of transcendental, then I shall be forced to define it once again. In order to understand Critique of Pure Reason, when it was published in 1781 for the first time and 1786 for the second time, the second edition, most of the scholars of the world could not understand it, and they forced Kant to write an introductory book. Then Kant wrote another book, Prolegomena to Any Future Metaphysics, which is an introductory book. And actually in that book, he has defined the meaning of the word transcendental. Transcendental, as we understand in other books and in our ordinary discourse, that it is something to go beyond, to transcend our level of thought and existence and to go to a higher level. It is not like that. Transcendental means, for Kant, the a priori conditions, the a priori conditions of knowledge. So what are the a priori elements supplied by our understanding, by our pure reason, after we have some amount of sensible intuition? So another important word he uses most of the time, that is intuition. And intuition, roughly we may understand it to be sense data, but it is not exactly sense data as per the opinion of the empirical philosophers. But even if in intuition there is element of thought, there is involvement of understanding, there is involvement of reason. So intuition itself is a mixture of both sense or perception and conception. But it is the basic unit of knowledge with which Kant begins. Anyway, so the four questions he has asked, he has tried to solve these questions in the whole book of Critique of Pure Reason, which is 669 pages as per the translation of Professor M.K. Smith. And for your information, two more translations. There are so many translations by Michael Zorn and Max Muller, and some others are there, but say up to 90, N.K. Smith's translation was the best. But after that, two better translations have come up, one published by Oxford and another by some American university. So that is, the book is also with me, Hackett Publishing Company, Indianapolis, Cambridge. So it is also published by Indianapolis and Cambridge both. And the author is a German who has translated it into English, is Werner S. Pluhar. And I think so far, the Pluhar's translation is the best. Anyway, Kant has divided the pure reason into three faculties: sensibility, understanding, and pure reason. So I have to go very fast because as I have been told by Om Narayan Rao, that I have to cover so many things. and my previous speaker is absent. So anyway, so aesthetic is the theory of sensibility. So our ability to sense, and let me be very brief. Kant points out we have two forms of sensibility, two subjective forms of sensibility, or we can say two subjective forms of intuition. They are space and time. Most of the people all over the world will say that space and time are outside objects. So Newton or other scientists, so they will say, how could space and time be subjective forms? But Kant, as you know, I should have pointed out at the outset, he has made a Copernican revolution in the field of epistemology. As you know, the Copernican revolution is very popular. Um, Copernicus initiated the idea that it is not the earth which is uh, fixed and heavenly bodies are moving around it. Why not it be that heavenly bodies are fixed and earth is moving around it? The idea given by Copernicus was developed by Kepler, Galileo, Newton, and ultimately the heliocentric explanation of planetary motion was established. So likewise, Kant, when talking about his theory of knowledge, he says it is not the outside object which determines my knowledge. It is I. You may call it a type of subjectivism. It is I. But it is not subjectivism. Yes. It is I, and my faculties determine the knowledge of the external world. And a very famous sentence is there, understanding maketh nature. It is my understanding which makes the knowledge of the external world possible. So space and time are not two objects in the outside world. They are not abstractions from experience of objects in space and changes in space. They are two forms of my sensibility, and through those two forms I only acquire intuitions. Intuitions cannot be acquired without these two forms of understanding, two forms of sensibility. So there are two forms. So in this context, he makes a very famous sentence that only I will elaborate and then I will skip over to understanding. He says space and time are empirically real and transcendentally ideal. I have already told you the meaning of the word transcendental, means the a priori conditions of knowledge. So space and time are empirically real, but transcendentally ideal. Whenever we are experiencing something in the outside space, still I also speak like a common man outside space, even if I know that it is a form of my sensibility. But we cannot avoid the impact of ordinary language. We cannot speak in the language of Kant always. So whenever I'm experiencing something in the space, space is empirical. Space is empirical.
Hello, Rao sir. Hello.
I'm just talking to him. Just talking to him. His connectivity is lost. His connectivity is lost. I'm just talking to him.
Okay, okay.
हेलो सर आपन कनेक्शन टा कटि जाई छी आउथर जॉइन करंतु सर हां हां आउथर जॉइन करंतु सर ठीक अछि सर ठीक ओके सर ओके सर ओके सर he is joining connectivity is lost he is joining soon
Yes. Hello.
Yes,
Hello.
sir. Yes, sir. You are audible.
Ah, okay. Okay. So this is the problem. It disconnects all of us. So anyway, so space and time are empirically real and transcendentally ideal. So as apparent forms of my sensibility, um, they are prior to my experience. They are logically prior to my experience. If I do not presuppose these two forms as pure forms of my sensibility, then all my experience would be impossible. So I am not going to further analyze this concept, and I am switching over to understanding, the faculty of understanding. One thing, space and time makes the knowledge of mathematics possible. If I do not speak a few words, then it will be injustice to my thesis um, of Kant's philosophy of mathematics. So space, so to say, is three-dimensional, and the description of space is geometry, and time is nothing but um, change of state of objects in space. If there is no change in the world, then there is no um arithmetic. How change is related with arithmetic? Change is nothing but the succession of time. Because there is change in the state of objects of space, so we say one state is prior to the second state, the second state is prior to the third state, or the third state is after second, or the fourth state is after third. So concepts of after, before, simultaneous, these are the forms of changes, or these are forms of time. So time is nothing but the other name of change, and change is nothing but the other name of causality. Causality is nothing but the succession of states of objects in time. So like this, causality, space, time, they are interlinked. And number is nothing but succession of time. One is after, uh, one is before two, two is after one, three is after two, and two is before three. So like this, the number system goes on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
पुलिस बड़े स्तर पर मनीष की खोज में लगी हुई।
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Hello.
Yes, sir. You are audible.
No. Yes, yes. No, anyway, I'm sorry for the disturbance. Um, 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 so, number is the other name of change. Change, causality. Uh, so, the change, causality, number. They are synonyms, so to say. So, after, before, simultaneity, these are all forms of time. And from time emerges the number series by the concepts like before, after, so like this. So, to say, geometry is the description of space, time is the description of time, and mathematical sentences like 7 plus 5 is equal to 12, and all alteration has some cause. So these are all synthetic a priori judgments. So I am not going to discuss them in detail. Now I am switching over to understanding. So the second faculty of pure reason is our faculty of understanding. So after we have intuitions, so simply bare intuitions cannot make knowledge possible. What we need concepts to systematize, to be put into some specific rule-bound object. So unless we do that, knowledge would be impossible. And there is one famous sentence by Kant, thoughts without concepts. Sorry, concepts. Thoughts without intuitions is empty, and concepts without what's that? The famous sentence: thoughts without. Can any of you assist me?
Concepts are empty and percepts without concepts are blind.
Okay.
Sir, hello.
I'm just.
Concepts without percepts are empty and percepts
Yes.
without concepts are blind.
Yes. Just 1 minute. Um, uh, 1 minute. Anyway, so simply intuitions cannot make knowledge possible. So in order to put the intuitions into some conceptual framework, we need some pure concepts. And Kant points out those pure concepts, in the classification of propositions of Aristotle. Aristotle, for the first time, used the concept category. Category, according to Aristotle, there were 10 in number. Categories were meant for describing the objects of the world. Let me just tell you. Let me tell you from where Kant brings the concept of category and how he systematizes them and speaks about 12 categories of his understanding, the pure concepts of his understanding. Just I have made some notes. Yes. Aristotle, for the first time in his work, Categories and the Interpretation, Oxford University Press, published by, had talked about categories. He had picked them up rhapsodically in order to talk about the things of the world. They are 10 in number, and he called them categories or predicaments. Aristotle uses another word for categories, that is predicaments. The categories are of the things said. Each signifies either substance or quantity or qualification or relative of where, of when, of being in a position or having or doing or being affected. These are categories. To give a rough idea, examples: substance are man, horse. Quantity is 4 foot, 5 foot. He uses the word foot instead of feet. It is translated like this. Of qualification, he says white, grammatical. Of relative, double, half, larger. Of where, in the liceman, in the marketplace. Of when, it's a category of time, yesterday, last year. Of being in a position is lying, is sitting. Of having, have shoes. Of having is a possession, have shoes on, have armor on. Of doing, it is action, cutting, burning. Of being affected, being caught, being born. So these are the categories by which he wants to explain the objects of the world and our involvement with the world, how we communicate with the world, how we use language and put our language into different categories. To these pure concepts of understanding, he named categories and further pointed out some derivative concepts of understanding, which he calls predicables. And predicables are opposition, priority, simultaneity, motion, having, human thought, behavior, action, is put into basic concepts in the manner I have already pointed out that they are chosen rhapsodically he has not made a systematic attempt to systematize our knowledge. So what Kant did, he took the categories of Aristotle, and at the same time he took the classification of propositions. Classification of propositions of Aristotle, and so combining these two, he developed his 12 categories. His categories have 4 headings. So as we know, under quantity, the categories are totality, plurality, and unity, respectively connected with universal, particular, and singular propositions. Under quality, the propositions are affirmative, negative, and infinitive, and the categories are reality, negation, and limitation. According to relation, there are 3 kinds of propositions: categorical, hypothetical, and disjunctive. So in categorical proposition, he locates the category substance and inherence, subsistence and inherence, that is the category of substance. And in hypothetical proposition, we look at the category of causality, cause and effect, and in the disjunctive proposition, he look at the category of community, which is agent and person. And in the other fourth heading is according to modality. There are also three categories. They are according to three propositions: problematic, assertory, and apodictic. According to problematic proposition, the category is possibility, and impossibility is associated with it. Then existence and non-existence with esoteric proposition, and in the apodictic or necessary proposition, the concept necessity is associated. This Kant calls what? Metaphysical deduction of categories. Metaphysical deduction of categories points out the location of categories in the classification of propositions. Then Kant, after looking at these categories, are divided into two types. They are mathematical and dynamical. Categories according to quantity and quality, they are single concepts. They are single concepts like unity, plurality and totality, reality, negation and limitation. They are single concepts, so they are said to be mathematical categories. And there is also justification why Kant calls them mathematical, and the categories according to relation and modality, Kant calls them dynamical categories. Dynamical because they are understood with relation to each other. There is not one concept, one category. Actually, two concepts are involved in each category. In case of substance, subsistence and inherence, and in case of causality, cause and effect. In case of community, agent and patient, and then according to modality, in case of possibility, impossibility is involved, then existence, non-existence, and in case of necessity, necessary, and contingency. So both the concepts are, two concepts are involved. So because there are two concepts involved in order to understand a category, so these categories are known to be dynamical. So these categories are said to be pure concepts of understanding, and those pure concepts are vital to systematize our intuition. So without these categories, intuition simply cannot make knowledge possible. So intuitions and concepts, pure concepts, both make knowledge possible. So after discussing the derivation of the categories in the classification of propositions and the categories as has been discussed by Aristotle in a different book. So he established these 12 categories, and also he has talked about some derivative categories. And again, he calls those derivative categories also predicables. So from causality, he derives force, action, undergoing. And from community comes predicables, presence and persistence. Under the predicaments of modality, the predicables are arising and passing away. And so like this, he develops some more concepts. So all these things cannot be discussed here. mentioning these concepts and if possible listing them completely would be a useful and not disagreeable endeavor, but one that we can here dispense with. We should not go in detail into that development of predicables. So those things have been discussed in a different book in Metaphysics of Nature. So anyway, now come back to transcendental deduction of categories. Actually, schematism begins here. Schematism has a reference to this transcendental deduction of categories. If any of you have gone through the book of Critique of Pure Reason, so you will find in the translation there are two letters, A and B. A stands for the first edition, B stands for the second edition. In the whole of books, Kant combine first edition and second edition both and make a systematic second edition of Critique of Pure Reason. But transcendental deduction of categories is the only part in the whole book of 669 pages where the first edition Hello? Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Now you are audible.
Yes, yes. So actually, I am not looking at my mobile. I am going on speaking, but in the process, the link is cut off. So anyway, so actually,
Sir, you open your video, please. Open your video.
video.
Yes.
Is visible, sir. Actually, he's visible.
I do not know how to operate it. So anyway, um, so actually, is it interesting or just I am going on speaking? So, do you find it interesting to listen? Hello?
Sir, your lecture is interesting, sir. Interesting, sir. Carry on, sir. Interesting, sir. Carry on.
Okay, okay, okay. So anyway, so where I left categories, how they can be applied. So in the transcendental deduction of categories, he prescribes three steps. Three steps how a priori concepts can be applied to the sensible intuitions. So they are synthesis. Okay, just a minute. So before that, I should say two types of a priori concepts are to be applied to the world of objects. So they are space and time, the forms of sensibility, and the 12 categories of the understanding. So these are two types of concepts which are to be applied to the world of objects. Space and time need no deduction. We need not deduce them. They are directly connected with experience, since they are forms of intuition, and intuitions are both empirical and a priori, which I have already pointed out. So empirical intuition is nothing but direct experience. On the other hand, the categories are the pure concepts of the understanding. It is to be demonstrated how they can be applied to the world of experience. This is known as, in Kantian terms, the transcendental deduction of categories. By sensation, and here we are reminded of Hume and Locke. The sensation and reflection, we can have the knowledge of the external world according to Hume and Locke, by sensation and reflection. In contrast to that, Kant uses the words intuition and conception for the growth of knowledge. By sensation and reflection, they make an empirical deduction of concepts and judgments. Whereas Kant's deduction is known as transcendental deduction. It is not empirical deduction. It is not abstraction as used by Locke and Hume. But it is transcendental deduction. By such deduction, the a priori concepts of the understanding are applied.
Sir, please use your earphone, sir. Please use your earphone. Earphone lagando, sir.
Oh, oh. Actually, because of the need, I am slowly learning it. Okay, 1 minute. Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You are audible.
Achha. Oh, yes, ठीक है. So, by such deduction, the a priori concepts of understanding are applied to the manifold of intuitions in order to make knowledge possible. So transcendental deduction goes in an opposite way. It is not from the outside empirical world to the subject, it is from the subject to the outside empirical world. So it is the subjective conditions which make the knowledge of the external world possible. So this is I am reminded of, this is Copernican about his theory of knowledge. We have now categories in hand. How can they be applied to the world of objects? That means how can we have the objective validity of the categories of the understanding? No knowledge is possible without experience. No experience is possible without space and time. Space and time are empirically real and transcendentally ideal, which I have already pointed out. So all of our intuitions are spatio-temporal. Knowledge is a unity of combination, a combination, a synopsis, a synthesis of manifold of intuitions. That synthesis takes place by an act of spontaneity of understanding. This act of synthesis by spontaneity of the understanding is based on three principles. So I was talking about these three principles of transcendental deduction, how they can be applied to the world of sense. The first principle is, of the first stage we can say, first stage, the synthesis of apprehension in intuition, the synthesis of reproduction in imagination, the synthesis of recognition in a concept. I remind you, imagination has a very important role in Kant's theory of knowledge. It is the crucial role is played by imagination. But imagination is not the empirical imagination of the empiricists or the poets, literateurs. It is not empirical imagination. It's transcendental imagination. Transcendental imagination because imagination works from within. Imagination is not initiated from external factors. Imagination is activated spontaneously by the initiation of categories. So this imagination of Kant is known as transcendental imagination. That we can say a priori imagination. The synthesis of reproduction in imagination, that is the second and the most crucial step, which is linked up with schematism. The synthesis of, finally the synthesis of recognition in a concept. So the concept has to go these three functions. First apprehension, then reproduction in imagination, then the concept will be applied to the senses and it will be recognized. So these are the three steps. So to elaborate a little, synthesis of apprehension in intuition, I should say this is an act of single representation of intuition to the understanding. Intuitions are discrete and many. Intuitions are, we can say, instant time. So immediately what comes to our senses, that is intuition. So intuitions are discrete and many. They must be put together by our inner sense of time. Time is a form of our sensibility, the inner form of our sensibility. A single unity of time in turn an identification of space. So how we identify space? So we identify space by sense perception. So when we object, when we have a perception of some object, then we identify it, and that identification is in time. So a manifold of intuitions. One intuition cannot make knowledge possible. So it is manifold of intuitions. They are combined simultaneously by an act of understanding to give us a single representation. So a single representation, otherwise known as manifold of intuitions, so is a combination of so many instants of time. This is, according to Kant, a synthesis of apprehension in intuition. So first we apprehend different movements, the senses of different movements. Then what we do, that is reproduced in imagination. The act of apprehension necessarily involves an act of imagination. A representation is a continuity in time. A representation, in order to be recognized as a unity of experience, must be reproduced as a whole. So unless the representation represented before us as a whole, it cannot be recognized. It cannot be recognized by the understanding. The act of apprehension is a moment and immediate. A representation is a succession of moments of apprehension. So in fact, in the act of apprehension, it is natural that the previous moments may not appear before us. So though the act of reproduction, through the act of reproduction in imagination, the apprehended intuitions are put together as a representation. What happens here? So when we are intuiting or when we are having perception, so perception is momentary. So what we have perceived in the previous moment may not, cannot appear to my sensibility immediately. So sensibility is a succession. Intuition is a succession, moments after moments. So immediately what we recognize is a moment, and the previous moment is gone. So here is the role of imagination. What the imagination does, it is by the help of imagination, the rest of the parts of the previous intuition is reproduced, and then the whole is presented before us, and then the third step takes place. Suppose in the act, I can give an example. Suppose in the act of apprehension of a straight line, a part of the line is immediately intuited, and the rest of the parts may not appear at a time. It is the help of the imagination. By the help of the imagination, the rest of the parts of the straight line are reproduced, and the whole straight line is recognized as a single representation. And we call it a straight line by applying the concept straight line to the whole representation. So if you think of a straight line, so what we intuit immediately, some point, but the rest of the points are previously intuited. So imagination reproduces the previous points and makes it a whole, and the whole is a representation, and that is presented before us by the function of imagination. Now comes the recognition, synthesis of recognition in a concept. The above two processes are not sufficient to give us knowledge, apprehension and imagination. Give us knowledge of the external objects without the help of a third step, the synthesis of recognition in a concept. Discrete manifolds of intuitions are apprehended through the synthesis of apprehension. All manifolds may not appear before us at a time. Apprehension is a succession in time, so the previous apprehended states reappear through the faculty of transcendental imagination through the process of apprehension. The process goes on until a concept is recognized with relation to the whole of representation. Thus, a concept is applied to the intuitions, and this is how the knowledge of the external world is possible. This is in brief the synthesis of recognition in a concept. I may remind you of Locke and Hume in this regard. You, being an empiricist, may think like them and consider that it is empirical consciousness which combines the sensations and representations together, and through psychological abstraction we recognize an object and give a name to it. However, according to Kant, it is not empirical consciousness according to Kant, it is not empirical consciousness which makes knowledge possible, because empirical consciousness can never provide a unity to the representations. It will always be disconnected, separate, and discrete without a unity of self-consciousness. This unity of self-consciousness is very crucial. This unity of self-consciousness is the climax. This is the final condition of our knowledge of the external world. To this unity, Kant calls the transcendental unity of consciousness. It is the transcendental unity of consciousness which provides a concept to the intuition. In other words, Kant calls it the synthetic unit of a perception. A perception is a type of introspection. It is introspection of the inner states. We can call it perception of perception. In other words, Kant calls it the synthetic unit of a perception. A perception is perception of perception. It is a kind of self-consciousness. Finally, Kant says the synthetic unit of self-consciousness is the ground and final ground of our knowledge of objects. What is the nature of the object? So, some may raise a question. What is really the nature of the object? How the object is related to my sensibility and understanding? If we become reflective, one may ask a question: is the object something external to my representations? Is it something external? Had it been so, the object would have been an indeterminate X, Kant says. So had the object been an external entity, then we would have no knowledge of the object. So this is very thought-provoking. So had an object been an external object, then we would have no knowledge of the object. So from this, should we conclude that there is not any object in the outside world? So that you have to think, and that I will come to later on when I will make a small distinction between phenomena and noumena. So here Kant says that if the external object is outside of myself, then I cannot have any knowledge of the external object. This is for the time being. Let us be satisfied with that. The object cannot go beyond the representations. So the objective knowledge has a necessity of its own. What is the necessity of objective knowledge? The necessity is provided by my understanding. The categories are the necessities. Space and time are the necessities. My knowledge cannot be other than space and time. My knowledge cannot be other than the categorical a priori concepts. It cannot go beyond the... So all categories, he says, are rules. The rules which govern my intuition. The rule is that it is bound to be spatio-temporal and must be ordained by the categories of the understanding. Knowledge cannot go beyond space and time and the categories. So this is how we apprehend intuitions, synthesis of apprehension in intuition. Then we reproduce. These are all so quick and immediate. appear to be simultaneous. So it is sometimes I am reminded of the difference between determinate and indeterminate perception of Nyaya. So we can say at the state of apprehension in intuition it is indeterminate, and also in the state of imagination it is indeterminate, and finally when we apply a concept, so it becomes determinate. So the objective knowledge has a necessity of its own. It cannot go beyond the rule. The rule is that it is bound to be spatio-temporal and must be obtained by the categories of the understanding. So now I shall go to my notes. So this much I had typed by my own. So anyway, let me close it, then I will go to my notes. So one more point I have already told you. The importance of unity of pure consciousness. So categories are located in the unity of consciousness. The identity of the self is primary condition of experience. The unity of self-consciousness is the ultimate synthetic principle which is at the root of all synthetic knowledge. Kant talks about a synthesis of reproduction in imagination. The synthetic unity of perception is the ultimate source of all knowledge. That unity of self-consciousness acts as a productive imagination and combines the pure intuitions into a manifold of representation. Single, pure, instantaneous, sensuous intuitions themselves cannot initiate any action unless they are combined by imagination. I am just repeating, making simple notes. Kant's imagination is said to be productive imagination, as different from reproductive imagination, which is otherwise known as empirical imagination. Empirical imagination is reproductive because first we have the images of different objects and we reproduce those images and we recognize them in our day-to-day life. So the empirical imagination is reproductive in nature. But Kant's imagination is not reproductive imagination, it is productive imagination, because it produces by its categories and rules the intuitions. Empirical imagination is reproductive in nature because we use it after we have experience of some object and we reproduce it in imagination. Productive imagination of Kant is otherwise known as transcendental imagination because it is the a priori condition which is intuited by a perception, synthetic unity of a perception, and put together pure intuitions and forms a manifold of representation. A unit of pure intuition is an instant of time, immediately what we apprehend by the help of our sense organs. The unity of a perception, I am repeating, so there is nothing new, but I am repeating because it will strike you again and again. That's why. The unit of a perception in relation to the synthesis of imagination is the understanding. Categories are different modes of understanding. The intuitions by the help of imagination are put together under some modes and formed into manifolds or representations and recognized to be an object. Objectivity of knowledge comes from within, from the a priori conditions of knowledge. So knowledge is always the knowledge of appearance, but not of reality of the thing in itself. Understanding is the faculty of rules, the categories which combines the appearances and makes into the objects of experience. Thus mind maketh nature, understanding maketh nature. Specific natural or empirical laws cannot be located directly in the understanding. However, they are derived some general laws like laws of causality, which is contributed by understanding. Appearances and things in themselves. Appearances can only be synthesized and put into systems of knowledge. Things in themselves beyond space and time can never provide appearances. We cannot know them. So here comes the most famous declaration: phenomena only can be known, and noumena is unknown and unknowable. So things in themselves cannot be put into the framework of space and time or categories. So we cannot have any knowledge of things in themselves. Experience alone cannot give us certain knowledge unless they are combined by rules, strategies of understanding. So, in the second edition, Kant has repeated many things in the what he had said in the first edition, but he has made many important points clear. I am not going to in detail into that because it is already 7:30. The most important part is our interaction, and I know many students, many audience will ask many questions because it is Kant. If you do not raise questions, then it will not be really interesting, and so I should give sufficient time for interaction. So I am skipping many things because I have to speak a few words on antinomies also because it was my topic. Anyway, so to summarize, once again I am summarizing before I speak a few words on schematism. Kant's book is divided into transcendental aesthetic, then transcendental logic. Transcendental logic is divided into transcendental analytic and dialectic. And the transcendental analytic is having two important parts: analytic of concepts, that is the categories which I have discussed. Then comes the analytic of principles. Analytic of principles are again derived from those concepts. And analytic of principles are again according to the four headings. There are also four types. So let me remind you those principles. Analytic of principles are axioms of intuition, anticipations of perception, analogies of experience, and postulates of moral, postulates of empirical thought in general. So again, Kant has very tactfully and Kant very intelligently has derived some principles out of the categories. And suppose in the axioms of intuition, he says intuitions are having extensive magnitude. That means whatever is intuited in experience, it has extension. And according to quality, he says all intuitions are also intensive magnitude. So these are the principles. And likewise, he talks about principles which can be derived from categories of relation and which can be derived from categories of modality. So there are four types of principles, and each principle is related to a heading, to quantity, quality, relation, modality. So they are derivations from categories that I am not going to discuss in detail. So now coming back to so now something more regarding schematism of your conception. I have already told you the play of imagination. So sensible intuitions on the one hand the same thing is repeated. So actually, in schematism, Kant gives emphasis on the role of time. So he uses the word time, and he says time is the mediator. Time is the mediator between the categories and the intuitions. And I should say, time is nothing but reproduction in imagination. The moment we take shelter on the imagination, then the internal sense, the internal form of intuition, time, is activated. Because we reproduce the different intuitions, momentary intuitions, by the help of imagination, and they are put together. So this is the function of time. This is the function of time. So it is a kind of internal function, and time is nothing but an internal form of my sensibility. So by the help of time, in other words, by the help of imagination, I connect categories with intuitions. So some more explanations on imagination is here with some example. Time is the inner form of our intuition. Time plays the role of mediatorship between the categories and the sensible intuitions. When categories temporalize through the act of imagination, then we have a schema of a concept. Schema of a concept enable us to have an schema is an internal diagram that we create to ourselves to apply it to the intuitions. So I cannot say we picturize. So we, by the help of a priori imagination, we reproduce those intuitions and we make a representation possible. Scheme of a concept enable us to have an image of the concept. But schema is not exactly the image. Schema is larger than the image. It is more general than the image. If we put 5 points one after another, we can have an image of the number 5. It may be number 5 or it may be 500, but the process is same. We have to put the points together. We have an image of any, in order to have the image of any number, we have to put the points together. But how can the points be put together if it is a large number? But Kant says that is possible by imagination only. And the same method is applied, either it is a small number or it is a much larger number. So it is only the imagination can reproduce the points together, and the concept number may be applied to it. Method is nothing but the succession of combination of units into a whole. This representation of a universal procedure of imagination, says Kant, in providing an image of a concept. I entitle the schema of a concept. This is the schema of a concept. When we are able to provide an image for a concept, then that is the schema of a concept. Image of 5 is different from the image of 500, but the procedure is the same. Imagining succession of points, movements, one after another. Schema is different from image and is more general than the image. The image is a particular object, but the schema is a general procedure of the understanding. That material is a pure concept. So I am not repeating anymore. I am not talking about schematism. I have already told you how time plays a role and how time, in the name of imagination, productive imagination, a priori imagination, transcendental imagination, combines both categories on the one hand and the intuitions on the other hand. Let me now jump over to the antinomies. If I do not speak a few words on antinomies, then I think I will do injustice to the topics given to me to give you some idea. But once again, I tell you, Kant also systematically presented schema. In plural, it is schemata. Schemata of different categories of the a priori concepts. The different categories of the a priori concepts. The 12 categories are there, and the categories have the schemata of their own. Just let me tell you that, and after that I will go to the antinomies. Schemata of quantity is number. Number is not here the arithmetical number, but the number of a kind of synthesis, that is successive addition of homogeneous units. Number is nothing but successive addition of homogeneous units. We can have quantity. We cannot have quantity without successive combination of homogeneous units. It may be one, it may be many homogeneous units. In case of unit, it is one. In case of plurality, it is many. In case of totality, it is all. Likewise, schema of quantity is nothing but sensation in time. Sensation of what? In case of reality, it is presence in time. In case of negation, it is absence in time. Look at Kant. How much I should say, struggle. How much he struggled to find a concept for all our language structure. Reality is schema of presence in time. Negation is schema of absence in time. Limitation is schema of degree or intensive magnitude in time. One. Hello.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So you are listening to?
Yes, sir. We are listening, sir. We are listening, sir. Carry on, sir.
Okay. So it is just like a monologue. I am going on. I will finish it very soon. Just wait for 5 minutes. Now it is 7:41. So anyway, schema of relation is schema of substance. In schema of relation, substance, causality, community, these are the categories. So what could be their schema? Schema of substance is persistence in time, because intervention of time will be always there. The schema of causality is succession in time. The schema of community is coexistence in time. Again, what could be the schema of modality? Schema of possibility is compatibility of a thing with time. So it is possible. So compatibility of a thing with a particular time. Then what about actuality? The schema of actuality is existence of an object in a determinate time. And what about necessity? Schema of necessity is existence of an object in all times. So that's necessary. So we can conclude that schematism has to do with time. Schema of quantity is generation of time itself. Schema of quality is synthesis of sensation of feeling of time. Schema of relation is that there are some determinate relations between appearances. Either appearances remains while other appearances change. What doesn't change is the substance. What changes are the qualities. One appearance is followed by another, that is causality. Some appearances present together, continue to exist together, that is community. Schema of modality likewise, a schema of comprehension or grasping in time. If an object is grasped in any time, that is possibility. If any determination of time, then it is actuality. Oh, if an object is grasped in any time, then that is possibility. If it is grasped in a definite time, determinate time, then it is actuality. If an object is grasped in all times, then it is necessary. Finally, categories themselves are nothing but the logical functions of the understanding. So anyway, now I have to conclude schematism. So it is time, the intermediary factor in the name of productive imagination, makes categories now come back to antinomies. So how could the antinomies take place? So Kant's logic, transcendental logic, divided into two parts. I have already told you, transcendental analytic and transcendental dialectic. In transcendental analytic, Kant discusses the analytic of concepts, analytic of principles, and there while discussing about the analytic of principles, here he has introduced the distinction between phenomena and noumena, which I was supposed to tell you, but I have forgotten. So unless I speak you a few words on phenomena and noumena, it will be injustice to my delivery. Anyway, phenomena, you know, the appearances, and noumena is the thing in itself. At my presentation, I was telling you, what about the object? Is object is there in the outside world, or it is simply the representations or appearances like that? No, object is there in the outside world. If the objects are there, not there, then I cannot have the sensible intuitions. Object is there, but I cannot know that. That will not come within the framework of knowing. What is knowing? Knowing is knowing through space and time, and only the appearances can be known. Reality cannot be known. But Kant says they are unknown and unknowable, but they are not unthinkable. We cannot know them, that's true. But so can we not think them? Thinking has a different dimension. Knowing has a different dimension. Knowing is rule-bounded, bounded by the rules of space and time, categories like that. But thinking, you can think. You can think, you may think and you may commit mistakes, but you are free to think. You can think about things which you cannot know. So like this, there are three nominal concepts according to Kant. One is the soul, the other is the world. World in the sense the totality of appearances. Totality of appearances of the whole universe is a noumena. And third is, which is the, he says, ideal of the origin, that is God. So, an agnostic like Kant, how could he speak about God? So what is the harm in thinking about God? What is the harm in talking about God? Even if I cannot bring God within space and time. So, in the introduction, Kant has made a very important sentence. I must deny knowledge in order to make room for faith. I must, in German, ich musste das Wissen aufhaben, zum Glauben Platz zu bekommen. In order to make place for faith, I must deny knowledge. Knowledge has its own limitation. Phenomena has its own limitation. Noumena is the limiting concept for phenomena. Noumena says phenomena don't cross your boundary. Your boundary is within space and time. My boundary is different. I am not antagonistic with you. So, uh, so we may not know about noumena, but uh, we can think about noumena. We can build up our thoughts and speak volumes about noumena. But Kant has also done it in dialectic. But why dialectic? Why he has given the name dialectic? Because it goes in a there will be a thesis, there will be an antithesis. So in dialectic, it is broadly divided into two parts: dialectic of concepts and dialectic of inferences. In concepts, he points out there are three nominal concepts. They are soul, world, and God. These are the things in themselves. How they are things in themselves, their implications, that will take a different direction. So, but if we try to categorize these nominal concepts, if we want to put them within the framework of space and time, what we do, what traditional rationalists have done, so that will lead to contradictory conclusions. So with reference to soul, immortal, if we think soul is immortal, if there is a simple substance like soul, so all these things, then there will be equally counter arguments. For each thesis there will be an antithesis. So I am not going to discuss about those theses and antitheses about the theory of soul. They are known as paralogisms. So there will be parallel arguments. If you say soul is simple, somebody will say soul is not simple. If you say soul is substance, somebody will say no, soul is not a substance. If you say soul is an ideal, somebody will say no, it is not an ideal. So thesis and antithesis will go on like this, and definitely there will be a conclusion. Conclusion is this: don't apply categories. Kant will say, don't apply categories and space and time to nominal concepts. I am giving you the conclusion, but Kant has written pages and pages on these dialectical. Anyway, coming to antinomies, like thesis and antithesis, they develop with relation to the world as totality of happiness, world as world as the whole cosmology. So what are they? What are the conflicts? There are four antinomies, I should say. The first conflict is world has a beginning in time, limited in space. So world has a beginning in time and limited in space. If it is the thesis rendered by some philosopher, then there will be antithesis with equal force that world has no beginning, no limitation in time. The second conflict would be, if the thesis would be, every composite substance is made up of simple parts, and nothing but the simple or what is composed of the simple exists. So, composite is made up of simple parts, and all that exists is simple. So there will be antithesis with opposition. No composite things of the world are made up of simple parts. There exists nothing simple anywhere. Everything is complex and composite. So this is the second conflict. Then the third antinomy will be causality according to the laws of nature is not the only causality. This is very important and interesting. There lies the roots of science, and Wong is there, who has worked on philosophy of science. Causality according to the laws of nature is not the only causality. Then what could be the other causality than the causality in laws of nature? Freedom is also a causality. To explain the appearances, we have to suppose that there is also something called free causality. So appearance, the causality according to the laws of nature is not the only causality which can explain all the appearances of the world. To explain the appearances, we have to suppose that there is also free. How could it be? Freedom. Who is free? I am free. There is a controversy between freedom and determinism. If we stick to laws of nature, then things are deterministic. But determinism has its own boundary. Freedom has its own boundary. Freedom does not interfere with determinism, nor freedom is antagonistic with determinism. So unless we are free, we cannot make ourselves available to the world of phenomena. So once we allow ourselves to intervene in the world of phenomena, in the field of nature where the laws of nature works, then only we stick to the laws of nature. So freedom also as a nominal cause. Yes.
Sir.
Freedom also.
Sir, it's up.
Yes. So should I complete here? Now it is 7:56. So I'm finishing. So freedom is also an initiative to intervene in the world of phenomena. So in that sense, freedom is a free cause. So free cause on the one hand, laws of nature in the other. So somebody may say, no freedom is there. So everything is, that is the antithesis. Everything is governed by laws of nature. So only causal laws prevail, no freedom is there. Neither in the level of the individual self, nor in the level of the supreme reality, God. So I use the word God because God will come to picture, because without the discussion, because that is the ideal of the origin. So the fourth conflict is also related to God, because world is related to some reality. It is like this. Thesis would be an absolutely necessary being belongs to the world, either its part or as its cause. So we may presuppose this world is there, and there may be an absolute being which is the cause of this world, and the antithesis would be absolute necessary being does not exist anywhere, neither in the world nor outside of this, outside of it as its cause. So with this, I conclude. These are the antinomies or conflicts with relation to the nominal concept, that is world as totality of appearance. So antinomies would be there only when we make an attempt to categorize them, put them into the framework of space and time and categories. So likewise there will be arguments against God, favor of God when we talk about the ideal of the origin, and in paralogism also there are conflicting arguments. So Kant will give a solution. So what the solution in brief is this. So don't allow the nominal concepts, don't take the help of nominal concepts and try to give an explanation. Don't take the help of phenomenal concepts and try to give an explanation of the nominal concepts. So then you will be put into conflicting arguments. So thank you everybody. I am very much thankful to the organizers, Kailas, Pramod, um, and I am thankful to you all, and I am greatly thankful to the listeners. Maybe some of them are my seniors, to whom I have given much trouble of listening to me. I do not know, but 2 hours, completely 2 hours. And anyway, I am very much thankful to you all, grateful to you all. So if some other opportunity will come some other time, so I will take the advantage of giving this deliberation on Kant, and I find it's my pleasure, and in a way I am also studying what I had studied during my PhD period. Actually, when I was doing PhD, generally it happens you are enriched with thoughts, and that practice does not continue in the later period. But by the grace of destiny, so to say, I have developed reviving so what I had studied, and I am slowly once again getting into that world of thoughts. Thank you everybody. Thank you all.
Okay, thanks so much, sir, for your reflective thought and understanding on the philosophy of Immanuel Kant. You have beautifully made an analytical study and discussion on Kant's conception of space, time, categories, intuition, imagination, schematism, and anatomy. And now your presentation is open for discussion, and it's time to invite Devasi Sarangi, the moderator of today's webinar, to carry on the question session. Over to Devasi.
Thank you very much, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Thanks to Sacchindra, Raul, sir. Thank you very much for your
So,
lucid explanation.
excuse me, Devasis, you are in which college?
Sir, I am at Lakshmi Narayan Mahavidyalaya, Jamsoli, Baleswar.
Oh, you after qualifying SSB?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
The first SSB or second SSB?
No, this time only, in 2019.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Can continue.
Thank you very much, sir, for your lucid explanation on the philosophy of Immanuel Kant. So there are many questions on the chat box, and I'll read it one by one. So the first question is from Dhirendra Behera. He wants to know, why is human intuition sensible rather than intellectual?
Yes. So repeat the question.
Yeah.
Once again.
He wants to know, why is human intuition sensible rather than intellectual?
Human intuition sensible rather than intellectual. So the question itself is confusing. So what he exactly wants to say is not clear. Intuitions are sensible. It's okay, not intellectual. Intuitions, what do you mean by intellectual? Kant doesn't use the word intellect. Kant doesn't use the word intellect. So intellectual, if you understand that they belong to the faculty of rationality, the intuitions are both sensible and belong to the faculty of understanding, in the sense that categories are applied to the intuition. So they are not intellectuals the sensibles are intuitions. They are related to our sense organs, our immediate apprehensions. How can they be intellectual? How can they belong to intellect? Or if we take the faculty of reasoning as the intellect, how can they belong to intellect? But the categories of the intellect or the reason, understanding, they are applied to the sensible intuitions. So this much I should say. But he should think properly. What he understands by intellect, what he understands by intuition. So think it more seriously. Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. Then the next question is from Dr. Manoj Tanwar. He wants to know the role of imagination in Kantian philosophy.
Yes. I have told it again and again. I have repeated it again and again. Kantian imagination is not same as empirical imagination or poetic imagination. In case of, I should say empirical imagination instead of saying poetic imagination. In empirical imagination, first we have the images, then we reproduce the images. But in Kantian imagination is not a faculty of reproduction. Imagination is a faculty of production. Imagination produces, I should say, as an agent of the categories. Imagination produces the sensible intuitions. Kant goes in an opposite way. So categories are applied to the sensible intuitions through the productive imagination, because imagination combines the sensible intuitions. Intuitions are immediate and instantaneous, because previous instants are gone out of my perceptual framework, so they are produced by imagination and put into a whole. That is the function of imagination, and that is called productive imagination. And productive imagination is the medium of application of categories to the sensible intuition. So this much I should say. So unless somebody reads it again and again, so one cannot have a clear picture. So next, okay, next.
Yeah, thank you, sir. The next question is from Sasmita Bisoi. She wants to know what are the distinction between schematism and principles of peer understanding. I think network issue.
The space is not visible.
Yeah, a network issue. Actually, he left. There is a network problem. Yeah.
Network problem, and he is also not visible. His face is not visible.
Yeah, actually, he left.
Left, huh? Okay,
Yeah.
wait for time. Wait for. Joined yet? Not joined yet, huh? Is he trying to join? No.
No.
Hello.
Devasis.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Pramod sir, okay, Pramod sir wants to conclude here.
Wants to
I
conclude.
don't know.
Okay, then. If he wants to conclude, then yeah. Let me.
Should we wait for another 1 minute?
Yeah, we can wait another 1 or 2 minutes.
Then conclude. Rao sir?
Rao sir wants to say something.
Say something.
Yeah.
Please listen. He's joining. He's joining. You see. But not joined yet. Rao sir informed that he's joining.
Yes, sir, he's joining, sir. He's joining. He's joining.
Joined. Then not ask so many questions, okay? Devasis. Ask another 2 or 3 questions, then conclude.
Yeah. Then Sasmita, sir, is it audible? Hello, Sacchindra sir.
Sir, Sacchindra sir. Sir is not audible.
Yeah, he has network issue.
No.
Hello.
Hello.
Sir,
sir, you are not clearly audible.
Okay. Okay. Let me go outside. Hello.
Sir, would you conclude?
Can I?
Sachi sir. Sachi sir, would you conclude?
Yes. Yes. No, let others ask questions.
But okay.
Hello.
The best is asked.
Yes, sir. Sir, is it audible to you?
Okay, you ask. I'm. Yes, I'm audible. Yeah, you are audible to me. Okay.
Yeah. Then Sasmita Bisoi has a question. She wants to know what are the distinction between schematism and principles of peer understanding.
Schematism is about the concepts of the understanding, pure concepts of the understanding. Schematism is about the application of categories, pure concepts to the intuitions. But principles of understanding are derivations from the categories. In analytic transcendental analytic, you will find analytic of concepts and analytic of principles. And analytic of principles or principles of understanding, they are derivatives from the concepts. For example, there are, I don't remember all the principles, but every category has a principle. I say, for example, axioms of intuition. So it is related to quantity. So quantity as the heading of 3 categories: unity, plurality, and totality. So any sense related to quantity, any category related to quantity, so it will have extensive magnitude. So the concept of quantity, all intuitions and extensive magnitude. Without extension, there cannot be quantity. This is a principle. So like this, with relation to quality, with relation to relation, modality, he has given different principles as derivatives from concepts. that are included in analytic of principles. Okay. Hello.
Hello. Yes, sir. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Am I clear? Or?
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes.
Ratnakara Gajendra sir, Ratnakara Gajendra sir wants to know all our knowledge begins with the senses, proceeds then to understanding, ends with reason. Please explain in the light of Kant's philosophy.
All our knowledge begins with experience.
With
Knowledge
senses,
begins with experience. Not that all our knowledge. Knowledge begins with experience.
Proceeds then to understanding, ends with reason.
Then ends with reason. Yes, that's true. That I have told.
Yeah.
And reason also has knowledge ends with reason in the sense when the pure ideas are said to be the ideas of pure reason. That means the nominal ideas. Their knowledge ends. But the knowledge ends with the nominal concept, like world and God. But knowledge in the conscious sense, in the sense of space, time and category, that ends there. But pure reason has other dimensions. Pure reason has natural propensity to delve into the world of noumena. So if we get into the world of noumena, then a different field of thought will be open for us. But knowledge ends with reason. It begins with perception, experience, and it is justified through understanding categories and ends with reason. But ends with reason doesn't mean that reason has closed down all its functions. So the dimensions. I must deny knowledge in order to make that we have to keep in mind.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. Then the next question is from Sasmita Bisoi. She wants to know distinction between transcendental analytic and transcendental dialectic, which are under transcendental logic.
So Kant, in every caption, use the word transcendental. Transcendental, I have already told you, the a priori conditions supplied by our understanding. A priori conditions of knowledge, that is transcendental. Transcendental means in the sense of a priori. So transcendental logic is different from the traditional logic we are studying in intermediate classes. Traditional logic is analytic and it has its own laws. It has no connection with world of experience. It is away from world of experience. And from that Aristotelian logic, different logical developments are there. Analytic philosophy, mathematical philosophy of mathematics like logicism, where it is said that all mathematical propositions are nothing but analytical logical sentences. So Aristotelian logic has a different dimension. Kant's logic is transcendental. Kant's logic is transcendental because it has the experience within its fold. Experience is not driven out. So how our experience, our intuitions can be put into the framework of knowledge. So if we remind of the reconciliation, empiricism and rationalism, so in Kant's logic, both rationalistic and empiricistic elements are there. Element of intuition, perception, sensation are there. So these things are not there Aristotelian logic. Existential import. We speak about existential import of propositions, universal. So analytical philosophers would say Aristotle's logic has no propositions have no existential import, but Kant will never say that. Kant's existence and the thoughts, they go together. Concept and percept both go together. So Kant's logic is transcendental logic. It is very interesting if you study the beginning of transcendental logic before you begin with analytic and dialectic. So how he terms it as a transcendental logic, and that is divided into analytic and dialectic. Analytic रे understanding ର concept ଆଉ rules କଥା कहउचंती, dialectic टा कहउचंती एथि पई एई जो rules and regulation गुडाक जदि things in themselves को तमे apply करिवो गातरे पड़िवो, you will put yourself into trouble. That is the limitation. So Kant will say, don't apply the categorical framework, the spatio-temporal framework to the world of noumena. ସେଇଥିପାଇଁ ସେଟା dialectic ହେଇଯାଉଛି. Dialectic ଏଇଥିପାଇଁ, the dialectic is a method of development of our thought and argument. So dialectic dialectic रे गोटे thesis ହେବ, गोटे antithesis ହେବ, and Kant also will give his synthesis, the conclusion, what we should do, what we should not do. So dialectic रे एई तीनटा nominal concept को लेकी जो argument होची conflicting arguments से गुडाको से देखौछन. So next.
Thank you, sir. Then the next question is from Nanda Ghosh. He wants to know distinction between possibility and necessity.
Possibility of mathematics.
Possibility and necessity. The distinction between possibility and necessity.
I can repeat again the Kant's language. Possibility is presence of a thing in any time, any possible time. Necessity is the presence of a thing in all time. So time intervenes. Time intervene kale jaiki seta categorized habo. So possibility khetra re suppose I will say it may rain. It may rain. It may rain. It may not rain. It's a modal sentence, proposition. Into necessity, 2 plus 2 must be 4. It cannot be otherwise. So necessity is a judgment which is always true. Possibility is sometimes true. It may be sometimes false. So possibility and impossibility is there, and esoteric just what existential statement. Existential statement, rose is red, grass is green. So this something is true in a particular time. Something may be true in any time. Something may be true in all time. So possibility.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Then the next question is from Narayana Behera. He wants to know, can you know noumena? If no, then how can we discuss or describe it?
I told you, noumena is unknown and unknowable. Known कहला को कांट रे गोटे फ्रेमवर्क अछि, स्पेस एंड टाइम कैटेगरी भितर सेटा आसीबो नाही. सोल टा को तमे कोठी देखिबो, आ सोल टा देखि परिबनी, सुनि परिबनी बोली सोल विषय रे किछि कहि परिबनी. मना करचंती कांट मु सोल विषय रे डिस्कस करिबिनी. मना करचंती कांट मु गॉड विषय रे डिस्कस करिबिनी. आई हैव डिनाइड नॉलेज इन ऑर्डर टू मेक रूम फॉर फैक्ट. मो चिंता करि परिबिनी जे सारा विश्व ब्रह्मांड रे गोटे आरंभ अछि. कई जने कहि पारे आरंभ नाही बोली कहले मु आई विल गिव इफ आई एडवोकेट देयर इज ए बिगिनिंग ऑफ द वर्ल्ड, somebody will say no, it is a continuous process, there is no beginning in the world. So argument will go on like this. So argument will go on when you put it into spatio-temporal categorical framework. But to think about it, to develop your own thought, to communicate it to others, it may be a mistake, but it is a matter of faith. So noumena is unknown and unknowable, माने गोटे specific sense रे. किंतु noumena विषय रे भाबिबार असुविधा को आउ कोन को.
The last question, this is the last question from Sasmita Bisoi. She wants to know what are the transcendental illusion of paralogism, antinomies, and idea of regime.
ତାକୁ ଟିକେ ପଢ଼ ସବୁଠୁ if you want to begin with these things, better read a book, very simple and small book by Rasbihari Das, a handbook of critique of pure, a handbook of critique of pure reason. Transcendental illusions. ଆଚ୍ଛା ଇଲ୍ୟୁଜନ୍ ହଉନି ସେଗୁଡ଼ାକ ଯେତେବେଳେ ଗୋଟେ ଥେସିସ୍ ଆସୁଛି ଗୋଟେ ଆଣ୍ଟିଥେସିସ୍ ଆସୁଛି କଣ୍ଟିରେ କ'ଣ ପହଞ୍ଚି ପାରୁଛନ୍ତି so these are the illusions but transcendental is illusion we have them by our thought, that's why they are illusions. Okay. Hello.
Okay. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir, for nicely answering all the questions of this audiences. So thank you very much for your nice presentation also. So now it's over to Professor Kailash Chandra Maharana, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Hello, hearty gratitude to Satish sir, and thanks to Devasis for this beautiful, for making this evening very beautiful and intellectual. Thanks so much. Okay, Devasis, please close the meeting.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all, and have a wonderful evening.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.